when it comes to history, it is never really black and white like how the media portrays it to be. It is oftentimes very, very gray, and you can even see that in family history documents. And when it comes to this channel, I talk a lot about my Indigenous American heritage, and I have another story to tell that can show just how gray history really is. And this video is going to be very deep. Now, originally I was going to make another video talking about how I believe that the African slave trade was exaggerated, and I was organizing this video out. I had all the bullet points and everything, but then I uncovered something else in my family tree which blew my mind, and I'm going to share it in this video. All right, so the side of the family that I'm speaking on in this video is my mother's father's side of the family. And this side of the family goes back to Georgia, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right, but Screven County, Georgia. That's where this side of the family goes back down to. Now, my mother's father, he was biracial. He was half white, half Indigenous American, and I'm going to get into the Indigenous side in a second, but first I want to speak on the white side because this is how it all plays together. So, my third great grandfather was a descendant of a wealthy plantation family. Although I do have questions because in some documents it says farmers, and other documents it says plantation. And I also know that they was very wealthy. So, yeah. And also, as well, I haven't found any documentations of them owning slaves, which makes me think of my I my belief that the African slave trade was exaggerated. Not saying that it didn't happen, but I do have some questions. So I can't find any documentations of slaves that my family has owned. Maybe if they did own any, it's probably like a few. I don't know. I still have to do a lot of deep diving into that. But yeah, so they were plantation owners, and how they got the land, they had won a land lottery grant, and I just saw a documentation on that. It was a Cherokee plot that they had took over, which was confusing to me because I did do some research on the county, the Screven County, down in Georgia, and I didn't see anything about Cherokees living in that area. And I'm gonna get more into that in a second. But yeah, so they won this Cherokee plot in Georgia, and from there they was just plantation owners. Now, how the indigenous side comes into play. So my second great grandmother, which was my grandmother's grandmother, she had fell in love with a indigenous man. We don't know the tribe that he's from. All we know is that he was Indigenous American, and they always been in like that area of Georgia and South Carolina for the most part. And when I even looked at the Cherokee plot, I was assuming maybe he was Cherokee, but my intuition was just like, nah, he's not Cherokee. Um, and on this channel, I have been talking about my spiritual experiences, so that plays into that as well. So my intuition was just like, no, he ain't Cherokee. So anyway, she fell in love with this man, and they moved to Jersey. That's how the story went. Her and her lover just moved up to Jersey. My intuition though was just like, oh, the white side must have disapproved of who she was dating, so therefore they just fled. Um, I got a confirmation though just last night as I was looking through some documentations. I came across something that explains exactly what happened. So in this article that I'm about to show explains what happened and why my second great grandmother and her indigenous lover, who is my second great grandfather, had fled. So what had happened was, according to this article, which says that she was beaten by her father. So I was reading this article last night and it blew my mind, and it actually brought me in tears. So her father, his name was Charles Daughtry. If I'm pronouncing that last name right, but Charles Daughtry, my third great grandfather, he was looking for traces of his 20-year-old daughter, Miss Marie Daughtry, my second great grandmother. She went missing because this was right after he had whipped her. According to this article, he whipped her because he disapproved of the young man that she was in love with, and they was planning on getting married. And he was just like, you are not marrying this guy. So he whipped her, and days after, she fled. And in this article, it talks about last January she went missing. So he's like securing his traces of where she is at. We know where she went. Her and the guy that she was in love with, my great great grandfather, they fled up to Jersey. I didn't know about this until last night, even though it was my intuition. I didn't know that she was whipped, though. That brought me in tears. Um, because of a whole family curse that I feel like this side has because of this whole situation. Um, they did, however, so my great great grandmother and my great great grandfather, I don't know if it was a year or two later, but they eventually came back down to Georgia, and they got caught up in a whole murder case because them, along with 3 to 4 other guys, were plotting to kill her dad, and they later on shot him in the back of his head like twice when he was coming home from work. So yeah, just to give some context of the story, my third great grandfather was born in 1869, and when he was murdered, it was 1937. So this is when everything was going down. Just to give some context because this happened so long ago. But yeah, so they later went back down to Georgia and was a part of this murder case. And before I get into this any further, here's a picture of my second great grandmother. I'm getting all mixed up because this happened so long ago. But here's a picture of my second great grandmother. And even though I don't agree with killing your father, I am proud that I am a descendant of this woman because she is such a rebellious person. Well, she was a rebellious person. And I do see myself in her because I have this rebellious nature in me. Um, so yeah, I do see myself in her, and I'm proud to be a descendant of this woman because she went against the grain, whipped by her father, and still was just like, I'm going to marry who I love regardless. In this picture, I don't know who the lady is right next to her. She looks like some light-skinned woman, probably a sibling of my great-great-grandfather who she married. But anyway, so how they got caught up in this whole murder case, they had went back down to Georgia, and they got accused because right after this murder had happened, so her father was shot in the back of the head twice while he was leaving for work. So they found him in his car in the swamp. The whole family was looking for him. He was gone for hours, and it wasn't like him to just disappear like that. So they uncovered his body in his car in the swamps. And there's even an article, like pictures of people just surrounding his car, just viewing his body. And a lot of people mourned for him. Um, but yeah, they found him in the swamp, and later on, they found my great great grandmother and my great great indigenous grandfather. They was hiding out in another car in the swamp. So it was just kind of like not a coincidence. But it wasn't just them that got arrested. There were three to four other people that got arrested as well, because they all was plotting together to take over my Charles Daughtry's estate. Yeah, not to get all mixed up with the whole great great great, but Charles Daughtry estate, they was plotting to get that because he had a lot of money and he was selling his plantation for like 200,000. And at the time, that's a lot. That was a lot of money back then. And I do remember reading some articles about how his children was supposed to all split the money and start a oil company. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that ever happened. If it did, at least not on this side, because my grandmother got arrested and she went to jail. But later on, they released her though. So she did get released. So here I'm going to show two articles of the two men that were a part of this murder case. They were the ones that were plotting against Charles Daughtry, and I think a neighbor of, in one of the articles, because there was so many articles on this. In one of the articles, there was a neighbor who remembered overhearing these two men talking about taking over this estate and taking all of Charles Daughtry's money. So they were arrested. My grandmother, she was arrested but later released. And I have no idea what happened to my indigenous great great grandfather. I don't know if he got arrested. There's nothing about him in these articles that talk about whatever happened to him. So his side is such a mystery. So yeah, those are the two guys. And then here's an article of my great grandmother who gave herself up. And then here's another article about her mother. So my third great grandmother, who was married to Charles Daughtry, she got very ill after his passing, and she died a year later of a broken heart. And in this article, it talks about that, and it also says that my great great grandmother, Miss Marie, was released on bond and was going to attend the funeral and something like that. It's a lot to the story. So that's the whole history of it. And I do believe that from that situation, it like unleashed the whole curse on my family, because my family, yeah, they're a bit crazy. I did make a video about this like a year ago, and one of my family members has seen it and told me to take it down. So even though I am redoing this video, I'm just gonna leave a lot of parts about that out. But I do feel like that side of the family was cursed after that situation. And to make things worse, when my grandmother got arrested, she needed somebody to look after her son, who was my great great grandfather. No, who was my great grandfather. See, I'm getting all mixed up with the greats. She needed somebody to look after him because he was only a kid at the time. And she had gave him up to her neighbors, I believe in Jersey, either Pennsylvania or Jersey. I think Jersey. They took care of him. However, they didn't take care of him like how they were supposed to. So I guess my great great grandmother assumed that her neighbors would be good to him or whatever because they were black And in this community, colorism goes both ways. When it comes to biracial people, it's like the white side don't really like them and the black side don't really like them. And when it came to my great grandfather's case, not only did the white side didn't like him, but the people who took him in, they didn't like him either because he was light skinned with blue eyes. And like I said, colorism goes both ways. And just to not make the story too long, his situation kind of reminds me of Eartha Kitt's story, where she spoke about in an interview of being tied up when she was younger, because that's exactly what happened to him. He was tormented in that household, and he grew up to be not a good man himself. But coming from that background, I can understand why he became what he became. So that is the story of what happened on my mother's side of the family. Now, there's a lot to look into. Like I said, I'm going to do more digging on the plantation stuff because I haven't found anything of my family owning any slaves or anything like that. So, like I said, I feel like the slave trade story was exaggerated. But I'm going to look more into that. And as far as the indigenous side goes, now this is the interesting thing. This is the interesting part. I'm gonna hurry up and wrap this up because it is getting a little bit dark out. But it's so funny how this whole situation goes. And in a couple of my videos, I've spoken about my spiritual experiences and how it does play a part in my ancestry findings. So, the yesterday, not last night, but just yesterday, I was talking to this guy, and this guy, he watches my channel. He found me through this channel. So I was conversing with him, and he was telling me about his Ogeechee heritage. Now, when it comes to the Ogeechees, I've heard of that tribe. I don't talk about it on this channel because, as far as I know, I'm not a descendant of the Ogeechees. So therefore, I'm not going to talk about a tribe that I am not from unless I've connected with them and know a few things and they'll give me the okay so to talk about it on the channel. But I'm not going to talk about something that I don't know. I rather listen to other Ogeechees talk about their Ogeechee heritage. So, not to go on a rant with that, but I was conversing with this guy and he was telling me about his Ogeechee heritage. And I was, listening, intrigued and stuff like that. And right after the conversation, I had went on ancestry.com because I was getting all of my bullet points together for this video that I was going to make. And all of a sudden, within these documents, I came across the word Ogeechee. It just kept popping up. With the court case on this murder case, it was the Ogeechee court or something like that, and other things about Ogeechee just kept popping up, and I'm like, this is interesting. I just got finished talking to a guy talking about his Ogeechee heritage. What else? I just saw so much on that. And then I saw that my indigenous American great-great-grandfather, where he grew up in that area of Georgia, was the Ogeechee district, near the Ogeechee River. So it just all kept popping up. So I'm just like, wait a minute, because I wasn't seeing this before. I've been doing research on this side of the family for years, and I never seen that word pop up until now. So I'm like, okay. I felt like I was receiving some type of message. Not saying that my great great grandfather was a Ogeechee Indian. I know there was another tribe in the area. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name right, but the Yuchi tribe, the that name reminds me of the phrase all the adults used to say, that old slang hoochie, the whole hoochie mama, Yuchi, hoochie, it just sounds very similar. So anyway, I know of that tribe. I think there is a connection between the Yuchi and the Ogeechee. There's a lot of cheese. There's a lot of cheese with these tribal names down in Georgia, South Carolina area. So I found that very interesting. Um, and also, I do have family that still lives in these areas down in Georgia. I never met them, but I think I'm going to reach out because of all the things that I am finding. Um, and the last name of this family, it's not a very common last name. So like I do know exactly where they're located and stuff like that. But yeah, I found it really interesting right after I had this conversation with the guy yesterday, how all of this popped up. And then to top it off, I had a hard time going to sleep. A very hard time going to sleep. I just kept receiving a bunch of like bad images. And not for nothing, I just kept seeing images of, I did see my great great grandmother, like a flash of her popped into my head. She like looked at me. Yeah, I'm getting really spiritual here. She looked at me, and then I saw other different white faces looking at me, and it was a bit scary, and I had to make myself laugh. So I thought about that phrase in one of the most famous phrases in horror movies. Um, that phrase, "I see dead people." So I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I see white people," and it was just making me laugh, and it got me comfortable to like go to sleep because images kept popping in my head, and I just felt a bad presence. Every time when I look into the side of the family, I always feel a bad presence. And I remember telling this to my dad, and my dad was telling me how some spirits don't really like their old stories just being awakened and told and stuff like that. Some stories are just meant to be left alone. So I feel like that bad presence was my great 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 grandfather Charles Daughtry because of the way he treated his daughter and how he died. It was kind of like an unexpected death, and I can't really see him resting easy from that situation at that time. So I feel like that was the bad presence. And then the other presence that I felt like it was my great great grandmother, Miss Marie. I feel like she was the one that was sending me like the whole Ogeechee stuff popping up in these documents. And now that I even said that, I just felt a ringing in my ear. That was loud. Oh. Mm. As you can see, it just got very, very dark. So that means I've been on here for a minute. Sorry if I made this video way too long. I was just trying to make sure I got everything out. I feel like there's certain things I probably left out, but I don't know. I think I said everything that needed to be said. So I hope this video in a way was helpful because as you can see, history is not always so black and white. It's oftentimes very, very gray. And the more you dig into your family history, it's just like, it's always something, just another obstacle, another, I don't know. It's just very murky when you start digging into these documents.